Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My guest today is Bright Siemens, who is the founder and CEO of the mPedigree Network. Bright, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm fascinated by what you're doing. Tell me about the network.
So mPedigree works on 3 continents now, started in Africa, and now that's Middle East and South Asia. And the main thing we're doing is empowering consumers so that when they buy a life-touching product like medicine or cosmetics or anything that indeed can impact on their health, they can validate that that particular product is the genuine item. And this may not be as huge a problem with some of the things you buy, in the United States, but in many parts of the world, medicines are counterfeited. That is, people make knockoffs of the medicines. So you walk into a pharmacy, pick up the product, and it looks just like the genuine one. But in fact, it's a knockoff. And when you take these products, the best that can happen to you is that you don't get well. But many people have taken these products and have died. So we've come up with a technology since 2007 where each pack of that product, particularly medicines or cosmetics, have a unique ID on them, which you can use your phone to validate, to confirm that what you're going to get is the safe item that is going to improve your health and is going to harm you.
So is it possible that the counterfeiters are using those same IDs?
No, it's not possible because every time the ID is dialed in or keyed in, the system recognizes it. And so any attempt to send it in again actually triggers an alert. So then we know there's actually attempts to counterfeit the system. And it's usually very good intelligence because then we know which part of the country to focus on, which part of the supply chain to focus on, even all the way down to the particular retail shop where that counterfeiting can come from. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last couple of years is working with governments to use the data that we are generating in the system to make it more effective for them to target the resources, which everywhere in the world is usually limited, to those parts of the country where the counterfeiting problem is most acute.
So you're not only identifying the problems for the consumer, but you're identifying where in the supply chain this is occurring and giving information to government authorities so that they can investigate where do these products come from.
Indeed. And in a number of countries around the world, the governments bring us even early up in the process. So in Kenya, for instance, every farmer that plants any grain at all, so millet, sorghum, all the major crops, they get these stickers on the packets of seeds because there's a huge counterfeit problem in seeds. And when you think about it, the rice that you grow and the rice that you eat is barely distinguishable to the human eye. So there are a lot of crooks who put in the rice that you eat in the packaging to make it look like seed. Farmers buy them and then their yield plummets to maybe 80% lower than it should be. So farmers in Kenya have been empowered by the government to get certified seed through our platform. But in this case, it's not just waiting for the farmer to get that particular packet. It is that the facts of the processes that lead to the certification themselves are reinforced with our technology. So we work much, much more closely with the government in those countries.
So is a farmer actually getting product from mPedigree or through mPedigree?
No, they're getting their product from an agro dealer.
Okay.
And the agro dealer is getting it from a seed grower. But for the seed grower to assure the government that what they're producing is of the right seed and the right quality, the government mounts inspections and there's a whole series of protocols. The challenge is that in the past, these were not digitized. Now all of that work is done electronically as well. So there's an electronic counterpart to the paper trail. Then when the seeds are being packed, we apply our IDs on the seeds. So when they get in the farmer's hands and they authenticate the seed, we're not only assuring them that it came from the original seed grower, we're also assuring them that the entire government process of ensuring that the seed is the right quality has been affirmed. So you can see the two things. One is it is important to let people know who made their product and if it's indeed an original producer, but it's also important to let them know that the certification system, typically manned by governments, is working. And we do both.
So does mPedigree, do you actually get involved in putting that ID or authentication on, or is that something the government does?
So that's a very good question. The grower of the seed that's packing the seeds puts on those labels. But mPedigree delivers it to the government. The seed grower gets the supply from the government and then applies it. And the software controls the delivery. So the software knows that this series of IDs is with this particular seed grower, that series of IDs is with this other seed grower. And then When they've passed their certification checks, the system links it. So it says, okay, certificate ABC123, satisfying that so-and-so was done properly, maps to this bag of millet. So you are not only getting the unique ID per pack of millet or pack of grain, you also getting the assurance that the system is working well. Why? Because if eventually there is a problem, you trace it right back to who approved it, which seed inspector did which job, which germination official signed the certificate. All of that record is electronic now. So there's nowhere to hide.
That's excellent. What a great idea. You could do that certainly for drugs as well.
Certainly, medicines is where we started. And then we found out that there are so many other products where if they were successfully faked, the impact on human life is catastrophic. Think of your brake pad in your vehicle. You don't want a fake brake pad because a lot of vehicular accidents, for instance, are connected to fake automotive components. For one of the most fascinating things that I've learned recently is that in aviation, the aviation industry, the manufacturing industry, aerospace manufacturers spend a huge amount of money cleaning their supply chain from fake parts because a single air accident is hugely problematic for the whole industry. So this is a problem that touches all lives. And the way we like to see the work that we do is that consumer trust in global markets is broken globally. We've started off with the most urgent part of the problem, counterfeit medicines, counterfeit seeds. But eventually, our hope is that we'll become a repository of trust across all categories of consumables. So think of it. If you walked into your local retail chain here, I'm not going to mention the names, you will pick up a herbal supplement. What you might not know is that recent studies have proven that only 4% of the herbal supplements in one of the biggest retail chains in America actually contain any plants. Now, if a herbal supplement contains no plants, then what does it contain? Think about that.
So that's fascinating. Can you go to then not just governments, but you certainly can go to major manufacturers and offer your services?
Indeed. So Abbott is a very major partner of ours, a major US pharmaceutical company. Hoffman La Roche is a partner of ours. So we have major manufacturers who are seen as ethical manufacturers and they want to preserve that reputation. We are also thinking more and more about large consumer rights organizations. There are databases in this country that protect consumers that don't want to consume GMOs. That's their right. They should be able to know. Today, it's not possible to pick up a product, do a scan, and be given reliable, independent information whether that particular product is implicated in cruelty to animals, is implicated in GMOs, or some other thing that as a consumer, you should be empowered to decide, I don't have anything to do with these products. Now, we feel that increasingly, solutions like ours are the only route to empowering consumers to be able to assert their God-given right to choose the products that align with their values and that align with their interests.
So in that vein, would you go to a government consumer agency? You mentioned consumer groups, but I would think manufacturers would be the ones most interested. For example, have you gone to companies in China where you have vast amounts of manufacturing occurring?
So ethical manufacturers, certainly, but we have to admit there are also unethical manufacturers, and that is where you need government agencies. And with government agencies, you need additional transparency and accountability because they can also be corrupt government agencies, unfortunately. So our thinking is that the more institutions you can bring on to create this complex global database of consumer trust, the more reliable it will be. And some of that will require independent certification agencies that do testing. So one of the things that we are hoping to happen is that all of these laboratories, non-profit laboratories that are emerging, that are doing independent testing of products, where is that information going? We want our databases to connect to their databases so that any consumer that does a scan of any product, a cosmetic or anything that is of importance to their health, will be able to get this certified information from a third party that can be trusted to be motivated by something more than profit.
It's a great idea. All right, we're going to talk more about consumer protection when we get back with Bright after this break.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are with Bright Simons. So I would like to know if there are countries specifically where corruption is such a severe problem that even this system is difficult to introduce.
Yes, so a while ago we looked at Guinea very closely, and we found out that for some particular categories of medicines, anti-malarials I believe, 66% of the product was fake. Now when you have the overwhelming majority of the products being bad, and the good products being in the minority, you have a very different problem on your hands. In those kind of circumstances, obviously, you need to go beyond just the government. Though we also believe that technology itself is a path and a mechanism for improving trust in governments. So one of the ways that technology can do that is through transparency. To give you an example, the supply chain technologies that we're rolling out, parts of that system utilizes blockchain. Now, one of the good things about blockchain is that it's immutable. So if a particular record is issued by a particular government agency, they cannot change their mind if 3 months down the line a discovery is made in Europe that, oh, this palm oil that was exported from Nigeria or from Ghana or from Kenya to us is bad. It's stained with a particular dye. Why? Because that record is immutable. And whoever it is that certified it has to be held accountable. Now, the absence of systems like that themselves are often a facilitator of corruption. So one of the things that we strongly believe is that every system, if you carefully unpack it, and reassemble it with the right level of diligence, you will be able to create an alternative system that is better than what existed before. And we are on a mission in multiple parts of the world to demonstrate that.
So in terms of international law, what kind of help do consumers, honest manufacturers, governments have in terms of pursuing those who are generating counterfeit products? And also, what are some of the sources of counterfeit products?
It's a very important question because, as you probably already are aware, there are national security implications to these things. If I wanted to poison a very large number of Americans, the easiest thing I could do is to put in a counterfeit product in the market laced with some kind of dioxin. I could kill many millions of Americans and nobody will ever be able to detect until far too late. So these are huge national security implications. We know that major terrorist groups in the world have been financed through counterfeit trafficking. The problem is that, as you rightly pointed out, the cross-border dynamics is very difficult to get right. Because what is counterfeit in one country is not always counterfeit in another country. Why? Because there are different levels of counterfeiting. There are some counterfeiting that are intellectual property related issues. In some countries, the intellectual property laws are not very strong. So let me give you an example. A counterfeit Rolex is a bad thing. But for some people, it's not that bad a thing. You see what I mean? So in some countries where IP protection is weak, you're not going to get the police.
Counterfeit Rolex will not kill you. You're right.
You're not going to get the police running around trying to get counterfeit Rolex traffickers nailed down. Though, in fact, often in trade agreements, it comes up a lot. Countries that have strong IP protections tend to want other countries to have strong IP protection. What we are discussing, though, as you've probably thought about, is that where you're dealing with things like global health, we're dealing with a very different set of international rules and norms. To give you an example, when you routinely fake antibiotics, you make bad antibiotics, and people take them, the pathogen, because it's exposed to sub-therapeutic levels of the product, develops resistance. So we now have multiple resistant strains of different types of bacteria and other pathogens that cause disease in humans. The problem, though, is that they don't stay in one place. They move from country to country. And now we have some of the poorest countries in the world, some of the not so endowed countries in the world, faced with this challenge where the antibiotics that routinely work no longer work. So you have a global health problem of these highly resistant strains of disease floating around. How do you address that? It has to be a global health dimension to it. So the way that we often see this is you need a combination of new norms, but you also need new technologies. that enable one government to pass intelligence to another government, enable one consumer in another country to learn about the origins of products that begin from another country. We see some really problematic fake medicines from Eastern Europe as an example in Africa. Traditionally, China has been a major source of fake and counterfeit medicines in Africa. Not too long ago, there was this major incident of fake milk powder where the protein part of the milk powder had been replaced with the same kind of substances you find in wood polish, because that substance can defeat most tests, elementary tests. If you want to test for protein, it will defeat that test. Without cooperation at a very global level, it is not possible to bring the perpetrators to book. That's one problem. The second problem is if I'm a consumer sitting in Ghana and I pick up milk powder, who is responsible for giving me the assurance that I'm getting the right thing? Yes, the Ghanaian government is responsible for making sure that the products that are on their market are the proper products, but some of this stuff comes in through smuggling. So once we discover it, how can we create mechanisms for collaboration and cooperation across borders and across national frontiers that are indeed effective? I think these are matters that we need to address our minds to. The global consumer protection mandate that exists for international organizations is very weak. There is no one intergovernmental organization that is the home of global consumer protection. Is it the WHO? It's very hard to tell. And increasingly, I have a feeling that until consumer rights attain the rightful place it has within the overall human rights spectrum, we're not going to get far.
Well, with some of these problems, though, they're really, and antibiotics is a great example, that's really a global concern. In every country, whether they're immediately affected or not, should be concerned. Has anybody ever been caught and prosecuted when it comes to fake or counterfeit medicines?
So we see instances where the individuals that did the importing get arrested and prosecuted in individual countries.
But not the manufacturers.
The cartels. So essentially what you have are these, we call them the third shift. So a lot of them are normal factories that produce goods for normal buyers. And then they have an underground shift. Late dawn, somebody turns on the machines and produce a bunch of other fake stuff. Now, these cartels are extremely sophisticated, and they're not that different from international narcotics traffickers, for instance. The challenge is that you can't just be arresting individual importers. You need to break up cartels. And in the same way that we saw with drug trafficking, the global cooperation that is required has been lacking for some time. So you may individually, you may be able to track down individual perpetrators, but breaking up the cartels have been very difficult.
One of the concerns that I had in doing the research for this is that anti-malarial vaccines were found to have a very high rate of either a lack of efficacy, potency, or in some cases were just totally counterfeit. So you have people, this is a life or death situation. Where are we in terms of improving the supply chain for those kinds of medications?
It's very interesting that you mentioned vaccines. So as you rightly pointed out, we have a category of products where the actual handling of them, which is the fact that you have to store them at a certain temperature, etc., also impacts on their final quality. And that goes beyond just making them right. You can make them right, but how you store them, how you transport them matters. So one of the things that we've been doing of late is upgrading our technologies such that we are able now, with smart labels and a smartphone, with a machine learning algorithm on that smartphone, and with one scan of the vaccine vial, to tell if it was exposed to temperatures that might have damaged the potency of the vaccine throughout the transportation. This is completely revolutionary, because it means that frontline nurses in different parts of Africa, in different parts of South Asia, before they administer the vaccine to the child, can with one scan of tell if that vaccine is good or not. And you cannot do that with a human eye. The challenge, obviously, is that you need to be able to percolate these technologies into wide use. And one of the challenges that have arisen is that some of the best ideas come from the fringes, come from innovators that are not in the mainstream. And so how those kinds of innovations get global attention is one aspect of the challenge. The second aspect is that malaria in particular is very problematic in the fact that there is a huge disease burden that is very disproportionately distributed worldwide. It tends to affect poor countries the most. It's also a disease that is correlated with other developmental indicators. And the challenge that we have to address is the fact that the same problems that cause corruption or cause fraud also cause other problems in the health supply chain. So how do you disentangle them? Pricing issues, etc., etc. What we've seen happen is that some countries like Nigeria have now made traceability requirements. So every anti-malaria that goes into Nigeria has to be tracked from the point of manufacture throughout the entire supply chain till it gets in the hands of the consumer by law. So everyone that sells anti-malarials in Nigeria is required to comply. This is a decade ahead of most parts of the world. So it's good that countries that are facing some of these most traumatic problems are also ahead in terms of the innovation to address them. I wish in a lot of other areas, we had the same degree of alignment between those that suffer the problem and the willingness of innovators in those particular locations to rise up to the challenge. It doesn't always happen. So it's easier when you introduce technology to make infrastructure very simple, but then institutions have to rise up to the new complexity that you introduce. And one of the challenges that have emerged is that there isn't still globally an awareness of this domain of social technology. And that's the challenge we are having with all these social media networks about issues around privacy, issues around security, safety. It's because social technology thinking is still very, very primitive. So we get the technology, we can build these systems. How to govern them is another problem. And very few thinkers are devoting time and attention because nobody pays for it. People pay you to build technology, but nobody pays you to come up with systems to govern technology. Now, those of us that are on the social entrepreneurial side of the spectrum are trying to force technology governance into the mainstream, saying that it's not just about building this stuff, it's also about how you build institutions around it, so that multiple manufacturers in different parts of the world, subject to different laws, can all come together and say, here's a common protocol of how you keep data, how you transfer data, how you respond to a perpetrator. If somebody does a scan and comes back negative, who do they call? All of these matters are governance matters. And unfortunately, there are too many engineers and too many technologists who are unable or unwilling to give sufficient attention to the institutional and the social dynamics underpinning these technology innovations that are coming. I think that is what is causing a lot of the problems with the new focus on machine learning and social media networks all over the world. Is that we are seeing that these technologies without proper governance can wreak more havoc than anything we've seen ever in our history. And we need technologists who understand that and can promote a new understanding of technology which links technology with trust.
And we certainly need them in government.
We need them in government as well. Yeah. And we need them in Silicon Valley and in different places where power is exerted.
All right, well, maybe this will encourage some people.
We hope that happens.
All right, we're going to take our last break. We'll be back to wrap up with Bright in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com. The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We only have a few minutes left, so it's going to be rapid fire for Bright. So certainly food products, that's a huge issue in terms of often there are toxic chemicals, all kinds of contamination in food, including food coming into the U.S. Part of the challenge is that a lot of countries, including here in the United States, don't thoroughly test products that may be cross-country, delivered cross-country internationally. So that would mean you don't have the data you need necessarily to help in the food chain. How do we tackle that problem?
So first of all, it will shock you to know that the rapid alert system for food safety is still run on email between Europe and the US and elsewhere. And
the rapid alert is email.
It is an email. And these are the most stringent regulatory authorities in the world. And even they have not caught up with the latest technologies that are available to help us fix this problem. So one, you're right, sufficient testing is required. There are now a lot of portable testing tools that can enable them to do it at ports. When they do that, though, they need to upload them into databases that are widely shared. The technologies for making the sharing of these databases smooth, transparent, accountable, and effective exists. But the will to push multiple regulators in different countries to come together to develop common protocol for this to happen has not worked. And that is a big challenge. So to give an example, not too long ago, it was discovered that a lot of meat being sold as beef in the EU was actually horse meat. This is just ridiculous. The EU is supposed to be one of the most stringent consumer markets in the world. Can you imagine what people are taking in this parts of the other parts of the world where regulations are not as stringent? We know that 80% or so of seafood sold in supermarkets in some parts of the world are completely mislabeled. So you think you're buying salmon, you're eating something else. So there's a huge challenge. The data exists up to a point, but they are in silos. The technologies exist, but they're not being deployed. The awareness is being created slowly, but nobody is added empowerment on top of that. And I think we need social innovators, social entrepreneurs, and activists working together to force these giant bureaucracies to move towards problem-solving mode.
What kind of challenge, and I know we're running out of time, but what kind of challenge does direct selling have? Because now with the internet, you have the ability for consumers, of course you see this on a huge scale in the United States, you see it to a certain extent in other countries as well, where consumers can buy from sources that directly that they may not really have much information about, and products are shipped to them from all over the world.
This has created a huge problem for intellectual property around the world. The only challenge is that it's perceived purely in terms of only intellectual property. So people are taking on eBay and Amazon and the rest, but only on IP grounds. The truth, though, is that if you're in the United States and you encounter counterfeit medicines, 80% of the time you are doing so because of internet buying of medicines. So we definitely have a problem with the internet. The good thing, though, is that the technology to do traceability over the internet is even stronger. Because you're buying it over the internet, it's already electronic. So there's the possibility to pipe it into other electronic databases to keep a better trail. The challenge is that nobody's doing these integrations. So we have some of the data sitting in ports, some of the data sitting in warehouses, retail chains, electronic data interchanges. The challenge is how to create hubs of data where all of these can pipe in. People think it's a purely technological challenge, so do blockchain. No, the technology is the simplest part of it. It's the institutional protocols to let databases talk to databases. And I think that part of it, governments have not yet been woken up. Some of it was going to require legislative changes, like we've seen with the Drug Security Act in the US. Some of it is over-engineered because some of the people that are making the laws are not sufficiently in the front line to understand the implications. So we need more fringe voices, more innovators in the mix, helping with the decision making. The thing where one group of people make the law, another group of people build the technology, another group of people use the technology, it just doesn't work. We're going to need more intermixing, more consumer rights activists, more technologists, more social innovators, more legislators, all in the same room, sharing ideas and coming up with new protocols to make these things effective.
What entity would be the best organization to bring all those different, diverse groups together?
It's a very, very powerful question. I strongly think that the UN system has a role to play in this in terms of purely convening. But I prefer the standard-setting organizations. They've done a lot of work with very limited political overhang. So the ISO standards, for instance, is an example, IEEE. They've been very quietly promoting global standards without all the geopolitical complications that arise. And I think a group like the ISO will be a very powerful one. GS1 is another one.
And how long do you think that will take to happen?
It will need people like yourself making this a global issue. Because until there is an awareness that the problem is not being solved properly, people are not going to direct their focus to the right place, which is how do you build these protocols to let these different dispersed dimensions talk to each other? It's not about coming up with existing specific technologies or existing new or novel interventions. It's about how existing databases can talk to each other. What is the governance for accessing them? What are the transparency rules? What are the accountability rules, etc.? And you need standard setting bodies to be very much at the forefront.
All right, I'm going to see what we can do to promote that.
Wonderful.
Right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
All right, make sure you go to mPedigree and see their website and what they're doing for consumers, for brands, for governments as well. There's a wealth of information there. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.